Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
When will New Mexico's leadership get serious about fixing its child welfare system? It's a question at the center of a KRQE News 13 special project that two of our colleagues here have been working on, and it's a topic that both of them have also done extensive reporting on.
Yeah, and of course this is a really tough topic to tackle, and we want to warn our listeners here today with this discussion. This does include some discussion about the topic of child abuse and death, but it is an important issue to cover, and we are doing that here extensively at KRQE with our two colleagues here joining us, KRQE anchor reporter Jessica Garate and also KRQE Investigates reporter Ann Pierret. They are here to discuss this project, CYFD, a generational problem. Both of you, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, same. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And we know CYFD, I think, is one of those acronyms, those state departments that I think virtually everybody knows at this point. It stands for Children, Youth, and Families Department, though, and it is a state department whose mission, according to the website, is to, quote, nurture the strength and resilience of families, partner with children, families, and communities based in trust and transparency, and serve by listening and learning from our diverse cultures to keep children, youth, and families healthy, safe, and thriving. So that's the end of the quote there. Whether that mission really is coming to fruition, I think that's at the heart of a lot of these stories. Questions about whether or not that work is being done. Jessica, let's start with you. You've been doing this for 25 years in reporting on CYFD. What has stuck out to you about this department in your years working as a New Mexico journalist?
It just gets really draining just seeing this happen over and over and over, years of this, just following it for 2 decades and just trying to figure out, what are we doing wrong and why, and how did we get to this place? And so that's been, something that's really stuck out to me. I've done research on looking at philosophy and what are we doing differently than other states. And that's really what we wanted to get down to the bottom of, and how we came about and how we got here and what needs to really change. And every year it's a discussion at the legislature. We know it's been a problem throughout the past 4 administrations. Yeah. And so we really wanted to take a deep dive and look at how we got here and how do we fix this problem.
Yeah, and you've been here now more than 4 years. In that time, you've also reported on different cases involving child abuse and neglect. It seems like, once any reporter in the newsroom does a story on a topic, especially this one, you get more calls and emails from the community asking, hey, look into my case. And I know that that's happened to Ann because we share an office. But you've also spoken to leaders and advocates about what goes wrong in cases like this. What was the catalyst for taking all of this information that you and Jessica have kind of reported on separately over the years and compiling it into a news special?
Yeah, that's a good point. We really do just get inundated with people. Everybody seems to have some sort of issue with this agency. They've dealt with them in some way, shape, or form, whether it's them personally or their family member. And so we know this is important, right? And it was really this summer, there were so many child deaths. And I think Jessica's going to correct me, it was 4 in 2 months?
We had 6.
6 in 2 months, which was alarming. I mean, 1 is alarming, right? And that wasn't even how many we had this entire year. So she and I, we've been talking about this for some time. What do we do here? What do we do here? And I'm on the phone with an advocate, just like, we're at our wit's end. It's upsetting. It's so frustrating. And she's telling me there are solutions. And so I come to Jessica and I'm like, we got to do something, but it's so tough in a 5-minute piece and a 3-minute piece to really put the whole picture out there. And so this is kind of how it came about, of asking our boss, hey, could we have an hour and really do that deep dive into this and cover all of these different topics? And then, of course, it was coming down to, what do we cover? What do we not cover?
Right.
How do we do
there's
this?
So much.
Yeah.
just all these different aspects. And I was so glad that Ann came to me and said, hey, let's work on this. And we spent weeks doing research after research and just trying to get to the bottom of all of this.
Yeah.
Right. So just some nuts and bolts about this. It's an hour-long special. People can check it out in the KRQE Now app. It's also going to air on TV, I believe.
Yes.
So this is, again, called CYFD, A Generational Problem. Is it a compilation of some of the old stories you've done, picking up archival work and whatnot?
This is a little different. So I'm going to let Ann does the first piece, and I'll let her describe the research that she did, and then I'll go into mine.
Yeah, so the first thing that you're going to see again, and you gave a warning, Chris, and we also give a warning because it is a really heavy topic. And one of our producers who was reading over my script was like, just called it a grim research project. She had to take a break. I had to take several breaks. Our editor was like, I got to go on a walk, just trying to piece this together because it's looking at kids who have died who were under the care of the state, whether they were back in the home of their parent or they were with a foster family. And these are devastating cases. I mean, we know some of the, I hate to say it like this, but like more popular names, right? So like Victoria Martins, Omari Varela, but this goes back 25 plus years. Right. So I sat there going through our old scripts dating back 3 decades, looking at how many kids died, who were they, what are their stories, what happened to them, and then what was the state's response to those deaths. And we found it was the exact same response every single time. Well, we need to do this, well, we need to do that, or, oh, you know, we're thinking about doing this, or this is why we couldn't do this. And so that's where we really were like, oh my goodness, like something's got to give, and why isn't it? And so that piece, it's long because unfortunately there is such an extensive history and there are so many child deaths. So really looking at that and sharing kind of what you'll see is, you know, a repeat response from these secretaries over decades. And the big point too, right, this being generational, right. This isn't political. This is, you know, it's both Democrats and Republican appointees. And so that was important to point out. We thought that was important to point out as well.
Yeah. Yes, and looking at, you know, both parties, we've had 2 Democrat governors, 2 Republican during this time since the creation of CYFD. And that's where my part comes in. Yeah. And so I took a deep dive into the creation of the Children, Youth, and Families Department. So I did a lot of research. I went to, you know, this is early 90s. And so...
And I want to jump in here real quick because it's part of the question here, really... Going back to the 90s, as you said, this was a bill signed into law in 92, the first in the nation department like this combined. It sounds like 200 services and multiple state agencies all together under one umbrella. And so you dug into this.
Yes, and so it was really fascinating trying to find, you know, how this came about. So I went back, I went to Larry Barker, who's been here for a long time. He connected me with someone who had been in the legislature for, you know, worked in legislative services for a long time, who then was able to kind of go back and get me all the documents. Because as you can imagine, it's hard to find. So, I mean, I have a stack, just a massive stack of the creation of the Children, Youth, and Families Department. It was under Bruce King's administration. And Alice King, his wife, a very powerful first lady, who had spent her whole life fighting for children and felt this was really important. And the catalyst for that was mostly that she didn't like seeing children who committed shoplifting. And back then what they would do is you're thrown in jail with adult population. And she really felt like we're just teaching our kids how to be criminals. And so she came up with this she had a task force. And it involved a lot of different people from around the state that dealt with child welfare. And as you mentioned, there was all these different services, and she really felt like we need one big umbrella. And she created the Children, Youth, and Families Department by going around the state for a year and getting feedback and what do you need and what do you see that's working, and brought that all together and came up with some solutions. And her biggest thing was, you know, we really need to be helping these vulnerable families. You know, even back then, we still had a lot of poverty. We had a lot of, you know, child welfare issues and trying to deal with, mental illness and things like that with children and trying to find those services. And so the way she created it is she made it a cabinet appointed by the governor.
Okay.
And it was the first in the nation.
Yeah.
And so while the intentions were great, 30 years down the road, we find that has become a major issue because it becomes political when you have each governor assigning the secretary. But I sat down with her son, Gary King, and he, at the time, was a lawmaker. So he helped pass this bill. And he was our former attorney general, also ran for governor too. And so he sat down, he was a big part of this because he was in the legislature at the time. Yeah. And so he talked about just trying, his mother comes to the legislature with this bill. We find old footage of her talking about it. And so that's part of the piece and the importance of coming up with this type of department and just how it came about. And I asked him, which I really stood out, I'm like, what do you think she would think of the department now 30 years later? And he's like, I think she would think it's appalling. And mostly because of the lack of resources that we've put into it.
Wow.
So,
and again,
just
resources is what those secretaries repeatedly say they're lacking, whether it's more staff or, it's crazy.
Well, so Anne, in your part of this special, you went through the archives and figure out, how many CYFD secretaries we've had since its creation in the 90s under both Democratic and Republican leadership. The CYFD secretary is basically like the leader of this entire state agency that is doling out these services to families and children who need help. The governor gets to pick that leader each time there's a new governor elected, as we all know. But as you went through all these dozens of cases where children have died over the years and the agency, was alerted to problems before a child's death, we know it's heavy research, but what else did you learn in this research? Anything stick out to you particularly?
Yeah, history repeats itself if there's really no strong intervention. And really watching all of them, their interviews really hit that question hard that we decided to really focus on, which was, when are we going to get serious about fixing this state agency, fixing our child welfare system? Why was one child's death not enough? But I also learned, and there was a quote in 2011, and I wrote this down because we couldn't include it in the piece because, of course, I found the clip, but it wouldn't work. Oh. But in our script, the quote is, I would like in 5 years to be able to say that if a child loses their life, it was not because of the negligence of the system. That was said by the secretary in 2011. Again, like in 5 years to be able to say, 5 years later, Victoria Martins was killed. So it just gave me chills, because we all know how much neglect of this system neglect by this system resulted in Martin's horrific death. And again, just that history repeating itself, no true intervention. And speaking of intervention, there's a reporter who asks a secretary in 2014 about that. And she says, well, she asks about preventing child deaths. And she says, well, that's complicated because our role is not to prevent, it's to intervene. And then you think, what? Why is there no proactive approach to child welfare? Right. So just some really alarming statements made over the years that you'd think would have set off alarm bells years ago.
You guys talk about, like history repeating itself, though, and its creation was very well intended, it sounds like, even from, the former Attorney General, Gary King, explaining his mother's intentions and what she would think of it today. I'm just wondering if either of you noticed, like, this is the breakdown. This is when cases start to get broken down. Like, is it a lack of a consistent caseworker on these cases? Is it just too many cooks, or what is it?
There's really so many different aspects that are contributing to this. And they're really, I mean, we've got CARA laws. We have, one thing I really wanted to look at was philosophy. We see it over and over and over again where our state is very determined that the best possible outcome is always putting these children back with these parents.
Right.
And that's just not working in a lot of cases. And that's where we see these deaths. And so that really, really stands out to me. And that's one of the things we really do look at and ask experts about is our philosophy. Yeah. And is it time to really look at that and see where we're missing the mark?
Like, is reunification the answer?
Right. And so that's been like one of the main things that we've looked at. And then there's just different things of, resources. And you have a lot of workers in this agency that, one lawmaker told us that it makes a lot of sense. You get a new governor, we go through how many different secretaries because they don't work out. And so each time you're just getting a new boss and they come in and they've got new ideas and so what you've just learned, now it's changing again. And so for these workers, they're already doing some of the hardest work you can imagine, going into these homes and trying to make the right decisions. And then you're getting constant from up top changes after changes. And so that's another thing that I think that we also saw this just a big problem. And one thing that really stood out to the last secretary we had, Teresa Casados, was just telling me, she's like, I have people that are embarrassed to say they work for CYFD because they get beat up so much and because, and so there's a cultural issue within this department that we're seeing. And the interesting thing I found through all this research is when CYFD was created, the big aspect was that we didn't want to have, there was too many hands into it. And so we're like, let's just make this one department, where we've now switched to where we have the AG involved, we have different hands. So it's kind of gone back to that. And we have, juvenile justice, and we've tweaked that stuff too, which I don't know if that's, that may be new solutions, and it is a different time period. We didn't have, in the early 90s, our issues now are very different, including, fentanyl addicted families and guns, and the number of children getting guns. And so there are some different, that's another equation of the story. So,
And if I could add on, I'd say for sure this lack of consistency in leadership, lack of good pay for these employees who are doing the hardest work, handling some of the most unimaginable cases, and dealing with some really difficult people, right? But I would also say lack of transparency. Our job as journalists is to pull back that curtain and to really help the public understand what's going on. We should be able to do that with a state agency, and it always seems to be this roadblock after roadblock to even just get any sort of record, to get any, and that's even after a child dies. We can't get a clear picture. We're having to go through attorneys that are now representing these kids and having to file lawsuits. And, that makes it really tough on us, because if we can't tell the public this, if we don't have that access, what access does the public have? And if they're not aware of what's going on, they can't raise their voices and they can't ask for change. Wow. So I think that plays a pretty large role as well.
For sure.
I think we talked about this just very briefly, but I understand you also went to the Roundhouse in Santa Fe during the special session in October to ask lawmakers what they think it'll take to fix CYFD and really be able to protect children. How did those conversations go?
Yeah, they're the front line, right? They're the ones who are responsible for that in so many ways, and they're frustrated. That's so clear. And so then it's like, okay, so what are you going to do about it? And a lot of them told me, well, we are serious. And I'm like, I of course held back some laughter with some of those people, but how are you serious? But the big thing that kept coming up is this leadership. They all pointed out this lack of consistency in leadership. Our current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, is on her 4th CYFD secretary. And that is extremely frustrating, again, with the change in bosses and things like that. But there's also these new secretaries come in with these grand ideas, And it's like, well, wait, what happened to the secretary before you used grand ideas? Are those now just halted? What's going on here?
And what kind of background do these secretaries come in with?
Right.
That is
whole other piece of it, right? A whole other frustration.
One attorney who has, been a strong advocate for these children is like, you wouldn't have someone in the tax and rev department that doesn't have an accounting background. You wouldn't have, but for some reason for CYFD, it has become, very political, and the governors have put in people that, there may be other buddies or friends or that they like, or that they think will do a good job.
Department.
And when this department was created, the first secretary that we found, had a wealth of knowledge in child welfare. And so a lot of lawmakers are questioning, and the public questions, and there's been a lot of questions throughout the history of some, through Susana Martinez's administration of who they were appointing and their background. And if they were, and it doesn't say, and we've had lawmakers say, it doesn't mean that they can't be great secretaries, but shouldn't we be looking at people that have this kind of background?
And there is some oversight coming. The Office of the Child Advocate, they're working now to kind of finalize that office and figure that out. That will be in the Attorney General's office, the New Mexico Department of Justice.
The legislature created in this last year.
That was created in the last legislative session. That was pushed forward. That was agreed upon. But what lawmakers say, too, is they've got all these grand ideas for a different solution compared to, opposed to the governor picking the secretary. But it's the governor who signs off on those laws, right? Yeah. And so approving that new selection process.
Yeah. And it does seem that there is a feeling out there that the governor's perhaps legislating something that would remove power from CYFD is a shot across the bow at the executive branch and just saying, we don't trust you to do it. And what governor is going to take a step back from the power that they do have? It's sort of seen politically as a sign of weakness, perhaps.
It's definitely been resisted by several governors saying, that they want that power and that control over that. And people, they don't want that taken away from them. Mm-hmm. But we have to look at children are dying, and what we're doing is not working.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
KRQE News 13 investigations. One of the biggest cons in New Mexico history. How did they get away with it?
Well, they had an accomplice. The state of New Mexico.
A road rage encounter leads to murder.
I miss him every single day.
Did the judicial system fail here?
New Mexico's families, homes, and lives are left in ashes.
There's a level of anxiety.
FEMA has been an abject and abysmal failure.
Watch anytime on KRQE.com or our YouTube channel.
Big picture here, which is what you guys are helping us view. A big part of trying to understand how to fix problems in the system that do go back decades is being open about what the problems are, right? And just getting some of the key players on the same page about what the problems are. Part of your special was a roundtable discussion. Who participated in that conversation, and what was the big takeaway from that discussion?
So it was really fascinating, and the way we picked the people that were on this panel have a wealth of knowledge, have been fighting for children, have been the first at lawmaking. They've been following every single committee hearing and making sure that trying to move the needle in the right direction.
They've also both supported and opposed CYFD, and we found that to be important too, that they do have different views, and they're from different parts of our state, because our entire state is impacted here, not just these big cities of Albuquerque and Santa Fe.
And it's really, we've had to team up with all these different people, attorneys and child advocates, and just share the story. So it's really taken a team, whether it's like we get the records and we share it with them, or they get the records and they share it with us, so that we can expose this problem. And so we really wanted those people to sit at the table with us and give us their thoughts and ideas. So one of them was Marilyn Beck, who's been instrumental in trying to fight and change laws. And there's been things that she thinks are moving in the right direction, and some things that aren't. She's a former foster mother, and so saw it firsthand of all the problems and issues that they were facing. When she spoke out, they no longer let her foster, and so she has just really been trying to fight. And she requests records all the time in these cases. She dissects these cases. She looks at the law and says, "Hey, this should have happened, and why didn't we do this? According to our law, you're supposed to be doing this in this case, and we didn't do that. And so she's really been working with lawmakers and trying to help and change and shape our state law. So that was one of the
She's
people.
one of the people I'm sure you guys have heard your name if you follow CYFD News,
yes.
because she's very vocal.
Yes, and we've
Yes.
interviewed her several times.
And then we have Kevin Berry, who's a little quieter, and he has run a treatment foster care for more than 20 years down in the Roswell area, serving several of those counties. And man, he just has so many ideas for ways to solve the problems within the state agency. I mean, when you are running a treatment foster care, you are a partner with the state. And so he has a very kind of quiet, even keel way of really working with them, but is still able to step back and say, gosh, this wasn't right or that wasn't right. And solutions was the big point of this roundtable. And so our third person is an attorney who works directly with kids, representing them in court. So she also has that really firsthand knowledge. All of them we just kept saying it's a wealth of knowledge. We could have had, I mean, it was a 20-minute conversation. It could have gone on for 20 hours.
And they have such fascinating takes, and not all of them agree on some of the things, but it really, they try to work together. And with the attorney, like it's fascinating. We've seen record settlements in these cases, and we need those voices, and someone should have to pay for the deaths of children that should have never happened. And so she has, and as she says, she's like, I don't want to be suing our state. I don't want, this to keep happening. Mm-hmm. And they really want to see the system change, and they see firsthand in the court system how these cases are handled. So
after that discussion, what do you guys think the big takeaway from having the panel discussion and those voices come together? What was the key takeaway?
I think that there is just a lot of resistance, whether it's from lawmakers, from the state. There are ideas out there. If you remember the Kevin S. settlement, it's 5 years old at this point, maybe older than that. And it's a document that lists all of these solutions for ways that the agency can fix things to really support and help kids in our state. And it's still in the court process. They've got, people who are monitoring, I think that's the right word, just making sure that they are doing what's asked of them, and they continue to be out of compliance. And so it's like, well, what's going on? Just resistance was the word that kept being used, but unexplainable resistance. And that's where that frustration comes in.
And I think finally, too, we're at this tipping point, and I think there's a couple of things that have really come together. And part of it is being able to show in our reports. And that's working with this whole team of, before you didn't have the video, you didn't have, and I think lawmakers are finally to see it. And one thing that really stood out this past legislative session was Senator Cervantes in one of his committee meetings, sat there and they just really went after the secretary and said, hey, I've sat here and I've been really compliant because you come to me like, the more we blast these workers, the harder it is for me to recruit workers. But he's like, I can't feel sorry for you guys anymore. Like I've seen the video and the story on the news about, the 5-year-old in Silver City, and that was horrific. And he teared up. And so I do think we're starting to see there has been this resistance from lawmakers to being willing to change and just letting the secretaries do what they need to do. I think everyone is fed up. And I think that we're going to see this tipping point of being able to find some solutions and being more willing to work with solutions. So I do think that there's, and they're listening more. I think that lawmakers don't want this either. Like we don't want more children dying.
That's another interesting point, looking at the evolution, right? Because even when CYFD was created in the 90s, I remember from your reporting that, the point was made back then. This is not to say that kids are just now getting abused and dying. Like this has been going on for a long time, but now we've seen the evolution of like, now we have lapel camera footage. Now, like we have journalists who are really trying to like get in there and get the details in front of the public so that we can shed more light on these cases. Hopefully that is a good thing.
I think so. And I think that the more the public sees this, and it's so hard to tell, and they're like, tell these stories to people and they're heartbreaking. I had another one where a foster mom lost her foster, like told our state, do not put this little girl back with her parents. They're not fit. It's not a good fit. It's not a good fit. And she dies a month later at the hands of her parent, allegedly at the hands of her parents. That case is still going through the courts, but just being able, and that was a first where I was able to sit down with someone and explain the whole process and the decisions our state has been making. And so I think we keep sharing those and bringing to light. It really, everyone should be outraged, from lawmakers to our governor to the public. And so
I think you both touched on this a little bit, that you feel like there is the wheels are turning in terms of change and seeing things happen to make CYFD more effective. But, with the original reporting that you did for this special, do you feel like CYFD is fixable, that we can sort of get to this place where one person in your story said, quote, someone can call to save a child's life with just one phone call to CYFD? What needs to happen to maybe get to that point, and is it possible, do you feel?
I think trust needs to be gained back. The state agency needs to do a lot of work to gain it back. I think they need to hire more people. I think they need to give a lot more respect to their workers in terms of the consistency in a boss, in terms of paying them more. I understand the secretary saying that they get upset, right? When Jess was mentioning, talking to lawmakers about that. But if you're not doing anything to protect them, right? There needs to just be a focus on the bottom line, kids, right? And push politics aside, get out of your worries about, your ego and what this might look like if you decide to change something as a politician or change your opinion as a politician. And both sides really need to come together. But I think focusing on this staff, really beefing them up, making sure that they're not overwhelmed when they're working on these cases, and then really bridging that gap between workers and police who respond to these cases, and making sure everybody really is on the same page. Because I know that there's a lot of frustration from police, and I talked to you guys about that previously on a podcast episode. So
that's been one thing I've seen on these lapels by being able to get them. Like, you have police on. I've got several cases where police are like, hey, you've got to take, telling the CYFD worker at the scene, you've got to take these kids out. And they're like, nope, we're not doing it. And so there is some, we've got to build.
Even those people are not on the same page. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I think we'll see, whether it be in this legislative session or the next, just looking at how we appoint the secretary. One of the ideas is, make it like a university. You have a board, a nonpartisan board that's going to appoint and do research and find a secretary. And if that secretary is doing a great job, hey, it's no longer political. They can stay for the next administration. If we're seeing change and things are going great. If they're not doing great, then it's, again, not political. It's not because, everyone is saying, hey, the secretary needs to go, but the governor's resistant. This is, hey, we have the board. It's time to find a new secretary and try to find some solutions. So I do think there's a lot of different ideas out there that we're going to start seeing proposed and seeing some change.
Yeah.
And I think, too, one of the things about the roundtable when we talk about politics, the roundtable, all those people came from different political backgrounds. And that right there is exactly but what do they care about? Kids and child welfare in this state. And it's like, this is what's so beautiful. And why can't everybody else get on that level, get on that same page?
Yeah, in 2025, when politics are so divisive and policies seemed to be informed by which side of the aisle you are on, I can imagine that a subject like child welfare at least can be one of those things where everybody in the room should be able to agree, no child should die, especially if the flag has already been raised for that child and somebody's already expressed concern and we need help.
You'd think, but here we are, 25, 30 years later. still having this conversation.
Well, we appreciate the work you guys are doing. Keep it up. If there's anything else we're missing, any final thoughts either of you wanted to share?
I hope one of the things I get when I post stories or, a lot of it's like, well, what are the solutions? What are the solutions? And how did we get here? And so I really hope this is a longer piece and more in depth. And so it kind of shares our history with this troubled department.
Yeah.
I also want people who do have issues with this state agency to speak up. And, we struggle a lot because they do reach out to us and our hands are tied because we don't have documents from them. We can't prove a lot. Part of that is because the state agency won't help us, right? But part of that is because, some of it is this like inter-family conflict. And so we hope people understand that too, that we really are doing the best we can to share their stories. Please still reach out to us and we will try our best to share your story and help you when and where we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Anne and Jessica, thank you both for doing this work. It's a great special. Looking forward to checking it out here. And thanks again. Appreciate you.
Thank you guys.
Thanks again to Jessica Garate and Anne Pierret for coming on our show and sharing this important work that they have both been doing and compiling it into a place where hopefully everybody can just understand that question of like how we got here, right? The special CYFD, A Generational Problem, is right now on your smart TV if you download the KRQE Now app. You can watch that whole special. It'll also be on our YouTube channel and then eventually on television, I think ahead of the special session in January.
Yeah, I think this is one of those topics where, as we were discussing right after we stopped recording, this CYFD, I think there's a lot of stigma that comes with the acronym. People know what it is, and oftentimes they know a component of the problems, but the whole history there, I don't know that there's really been an accessible point until this special that really goes over that. So I appreciate that work for doing that. If you have any ideas for our podcast, let us know. I'm at chris.mckee at krqa.com, also at Chris McKee TV.
And I'm Gabrielle.Burkhardt at krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media. Thank you all for listening and watching.